I would like to just express my real joy to be here with you this morning and give you an overview, a very practical overview history of what has happened the past 5-6 years among the Sun and other groups in Southern Africa, but with some reflective spin to it. I would like to use the time as well to just talk about some principles that we have learned as we go along. Let me go to the slideshow here. But very much, I want to just express my gratefulness to my colleagues from Southern Africa. It's quite a contingent of us that pitched up here. I don't know if you've noticed. So it's really been a fun thing. I'm standing on their shoulders this morning. They have done a huge work. It has not been easy. I can tell you it was in many ways a chaotic 5 years. And we are not embarrassed about that. It is just that's the way we learned. And I actually think we have come some way, and I would love to share that with you this morning. So we were talking about oral Bible translation in Southern Africa with special focus on the need for an oral translation brief. I'm sorry this is slightly different than the abstract you see. It is my fault. I should have not changed my abstract. That is not something you should do. But anyway, I did, because I wanted to really focus on more arising issues, which is the theme of this conference, instead of an issue that can probably be dealt with some other time, namely authoritative oral scripture. We're going to touch on that anyway a little bit. But basically, this is what I want to do, just a quick introduction. Where does oral Bible translation fit in? And then what are we doing in Southern Africa? And I will, there's much to say. We are about 25 projects we're involved in. It is not possible to give a report on everyone, but there are 3 specific ones. I will just give you some background, what are the methodologies we follow. And then 5 specific issues that have been emerged. And they are translation type, translation style, scope of the translation, the oral written interface, and then authoritative scripture. And then I want to tie it all together, how that actually feeds into a translation brief for oral translation, an oral translation brief. That will be, and then I don't think there will be time to go through the actual brief. I attempted a draft. I have it here. It needs serious editing still and revision. I'm counting on your help to have it done. But this is what I more or less hope to do this morning. Good. First of all, reflective practitioners in oral Bible translation. First of all, we heard about it yesterday from David Hamilton. There's so much Bible translation that has gone before, but oral Bible translation has gone before as well. The Targums, you've heard about them. Those were oral interpretations, they were called. But basically, they were translations of the Hebrew scriptures into Aramaic. They were done around about the 1st century before Christ, developed until 100 AD. In the beginning, it was forbidden to have them written down. It was basically for the benefit of the Jews living in the diaspora, more in Syria. It was all in Aramaic. But they became so popular that they couldn't resist the temptation, and they actually were written down for our enjoyment and our teaching today. Anyway, they have done oral translation that far ago already, the Targums. I distinguish 4 different types of scripture products. Yes, we're familiar with that. I quickly want to give you a picture. One is printed materials, printed scripture, audio recordings of printed, audio recordings of oral translation, and then oral recordings of dynamic storying or even oral Bible storytelling. So these are the 4 products. And then there are 4 oral strategies as we translate. This is slightly different. One is oralized print. We have been experimenting with that across the world. We've done that a lot in Mozambique, where we have actually learned, especially from discourse analysis and studying oral traditions, recording them, analyzing the text, thinking especially of Stephen Levinson's approach. There are other approaches as well. And basically the translation got an oral flavor, and to great success. It has led to much easier reading and so forth. Then another one is oral performance of print. I call it derivative OBT. It is based on print, but it's basically performing what has already been translated. Is it a retranslation? In a certain sense, it is, yes. We have an example in Southern Africa majority religion country where the print is the must. You have to start with that. But we actually did, the translators actually gave it to another group of people in the culture, and they've actually taken that printed text and performed it orally, recorded it, and that is being used almost 90% of the time. Not the print, but the oral performance. Then oral dynamic storytelling, and then oral Bible translation of what I call original OBT, which is the main focus of this presentation. First of all, is there a question? And this is a question that automatically will go to the translation brief process. By translation brief process, I mean a meta-conversation, an ongoing meta-conversation that needs to happen. What type of product do you want? Where are you at these different projects we mentioned? A culture and the people need to sit down with outsiders or by themselves. Is this what they want? And these are some good questions, and this is one of them. What type of translation do you want? And one of them obviously will come up when they want an oral product. What type of oral product do you want? Is audio enough? Do you want actually dynamic storytelling? Or actually word by word, verse by verse translation? Is it just a matter of degree? To some extent it is. The difference between dynamic storytelling. You will notice I didn't call dynamic storytelling really OBS or one story or any of one of those issues. I think it's complex. We don't really know where they fit in. OBS sometimes is OBT, and not necessarily dynamic storytelling. Is it just a matter of translation type? In other words, is a dynamic storying much more free, much more open, much more explicit? Or are there maybe more fundamental differences? And these are all conversations that need to be had at local level. And this is one thing that we have not done in Southern Africa. And if this is one thing I can leave with you today, almost like a sermon, please do it. I think it's key to the success of a project. I think I have a lot of slides. I don't think I want to go through all of them. Time is limited. But there are basically I distinguish four translation types. It is important to discuss this. When you do OBT, is it going to be a more literal translation, or is it going to be a more dynamic translation? Are you going to go beyond the limits of translation towards more a paraphrase? So here are the different types. Type 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's what I often use. The difference between a corresponding translation, resembling translation, clarifying, and then, of course, a familiarizing translation or simplifying translation as well. Type 4, with the typical examples that we have in English. This is a very important conversation to have at project level. Here are a few issues. I don't know if you can see there. Are there some more fundamental issues between dynamic storytelling and OBT that we need to discuss? And I think especially in the light of what we heard before, so good that Gil went before me, it is so difficult for this, so easy for us to move into a very much imposing from the outside a certain conversation. We need to be very careful what we do. But for example, one way to distinguish between more dynamic storying, and OBT is asking the question, does the translation actually add anything to the original meaning? But even adding, what do we mean by adding? Already there are problems. Is it just making it more explicit? For example, when Zacchaeus was in the tree and Jesus said, Zacchaeus, today I want to come into your house. Nothing was said that they actually moved from that tree to their house. There would be nothing wrong. It is very much inferable from the text that they actually moved, that they actually walked from the tree all the way to Zacchaeus' house. If that is in the translation, is it now added or not? One is adding something okay, when is adding something not okay. And that's a conversation that needs to be had. Another one is deleting from the source text meaning. For example, delete difficult place names. Of course, in earlier stages of storytelling, right in the beginning, especially if you have an unchurched, unreached situation, it is good maybe not to use the very difficult place names, difficult maybe cultural background issues, maybe distracting details. But that, of course, is not a long-term solution. At some point, there needs to be something that people can really trust as a long-term scripture for them. That's a different conversation. So even deleting something from the text that we thought that is not now as seemingly unnecessary, for example, the repetition of Pharaoh's dreams in Genesis 41. The full dream is being repeated. A very common Hebrew feature of storytelling is then where God speaks, He said, do this and this and this and this. And then the story repeats every single action that God said. That is there for a purpose. It is very meaningful. So what do we do in oral storying? Do we delete that? In OBT, we probably would like to keep it. We'd like to keep as close as possible. Examples like that. These are conversations to be had at local level. Last one is the changing of the source. What about changing verse order? Putting verse 1 at verse 8. After verse 8, is that okay? For oral dynamic storying, we do that. It's a good practice to really follow the local discourse patterns. But is it okay for oral Bible translation, for a long-term authoritative product? Questions that need to be asked and questions that need to be discussed and answered in some meta conversation. I will not go into all these other examples, but I want to go right into reflecting, just give you an overview of all the projects in Southern Africa. That's the second point I want to go to. This is a map of the projects we are involved in. All the purple ones are the oral ones in Southern Africa. You will see they tend to be in certain countries. It's very interesting. That's where there's more openness from the respective churches and Bible agencies. It is not across the board in every country that everybody is equally open to oral. But anyway, this is what we do, and I will be giving approach. What we do on Mondays, the team of 3 translators work with the exegete. And for the whole day, they look at a passage which they're going to translate word for word, verse by verse, 20 to 30 verses. They study it in detail, discuss it from all point of view. The actual exegete is Herero, and they're using the Herero translation as the base, also English, also other versions. The next day, and this is the most beautiful part of the project, they go out of Upuwo, where they are based, and they go to 2 villages. Of course, there's a master storyteller involved. He's part of the team, but they don't know where he is. They have to go and look for him. He's going with his cattle, so they have to find him in one of those 2 villages. And then after they've made the recording, before they left, they actually play him the recording, of their rudimentary Yimba story. They try to internalize the story a little bit. He listens to it, dismisses it as poor, and then he comes with an excellent rendering. And he actually re-performs the story and really bring in the oral features that the 3 translators by no means have. It's only very few people in the culture actually who's got those skills. Then those are recorded immediately in the village. They have equipment to record it. They take it out, and then only after sunset, they can play it to the people, because stories are only to be told. You remember that, Dirk? Only after sunset or in the morning before sunrise, these stories can be told. So after sunset, the recordings are being played, and then the people comment. They like this, they don't like that. And the master storyteller is present. He listens. And then the next morning, they do another recording of everything they have learned. That's on the Wednesday. And then during the Wednesday, they make their way back to Upuwo, the main town. They rest, relax. And then on Thursday, they go to the office. They record everything to a master computer, to a laptop. And they also then on Friday do a back translation, an oral back translation, which they record again, making use of the software called Audacity. And that is then being put in a Dropbox and sent to the consultant, who visits the project around about 3 times a year. So this is more or less what we do with the Himba approach. It's a rudimentary approach, but it works. They have done a lot already. They've done the whole of Mark, Gospel of Mark. They've done the first 2 chapters, the whole Christmas story of Luke, and another around about 50 stories as well, other parts of Scripture they've already done. But just having this very rigid weekly schedule has really worked well for them. Good. Now we go to the I already mentioned this, to the San. Here, the San languages in southern Africa, they are known for their clicks. We have 2 people here, 3, 4 people here who speak those languages. You heard some of it already this morning from Blessville, and can entertain you on those. Anyway, so we have 9 projects there, and it's all under the Sun Bible Partnership. It's a very loosely structured partnership of about 9 participating Bible agencies and churches. And then we have Render, or the preparation for Render, and 2 of the projects in Nata, and then the rest follow some variation of the Himbo approach. Good. Overview of the Sun. What they do there, they have a slightly different approach. I'll just show you a picture here. This is more or less how here they're at work with the different equipments that they have. They first do a Bible study, intensive Bible study as a team. They have a local exegete that helps them. They go through it, and then after a few hours of listening to the text, reading it, they actually print and oral together. It's not a purely oral approach, because most of the translators, all the translators, can read. So although the people groups are very much oral preferred, I need to check my time. And then they go on, they internalize, they make recordings, and they continue to internalize. They make several recordings, they internalize the text some more, normally long passages, 20 to 30 verses, and it's processed and memorized. And then they do some community checking in their local community where they live. It goes out, people listen to it, they don't have the sunset constraint that the Himba have. And then they get input, and then they sit again. So in the first 2-3 days, they process that text. They sit again with the exegete, check it against the original, and so on and so on. And then Audacity recording is made. And there's another team across the border in Namibia that speaks a related form of San. And they send then the files to them, and there's sort of a cross sharing of the different texts across. And they continue to speak those stories for a few weeks. Just a few pictures of where they are at work. Most of these projects have a makeshift studio, and trained by Gospel of now Global Recordings International. Equipment, high quality equipment, and they actually can do relatively good quality recordings immediately. And they will re-record whenever necessary. So here are they at work. Then, after around about 3 weeks of practicing and sharing the passage to and fro, it takes time to mature, they feel. And then a second recording is made, a second semi-final recording is made. And by that time, they receive feedback from Namibia. Maybe they change a few things here and there. And then that is how they work. And then, again, the exegete looks at it, and then an oral back translation is recorded again on Audacity. And at that point, they make a more definite recording. After a few weeks, and after they have recorded the whole text, revisited the text, refreshed their memories, they make a new recording. And that then gets transcribed and keyboarded into paratext. And a written back translation of that is then made as well, which is being sent via send and receive to the consultant. And then the consultant comes, and he's actually here with us, Essel, and he normally looks at around about 8 to 10 passages per time, and then they work all the issues through. And then the recording, a new recording is made, and that is then being uploaded to the GRN 5Fish website where people can download it. So this is more or less an overview of what we do among the Sun. It's not a uniform approach. I think every project there is a little bit different. Another one is in Angola, the Ngoya. I'll talk very briefly about those. It's a large people group, for almost 1 million people, the five languages together. And they've got a strong central one, the Kibala, around about 550,000 people. So the approach there is, the unique thing is that a written translation will eventually be the standard in Kibala, the standard one. But at the same time, oral, OBT version is developed in all 5 different variants. And they first started with around about 50 oral stories. And then the Kibala central one will start, a written one, but the oral work will continue based on the Kibala written one eventually. With the Bible Society of Angola, other partners involved as well, Israel providing consulting. So the interface, the unique thing of this is here the interface between the written and the oral. Let me move on. This story also has a master storyteller, the man in the middle there, the older one. He's amazing, and we have learned so much from them. One of the first workshops we had, we just tried to listen. Said, what are the oral features? What does your language? What is unique in the way you tell stories? And we came up with 18 features that they actually came up themselves, and it was a most interesting. For example, in Genesis 3, when you have when the serpent is speaking to Eve, the antagonists have a high pitch, so they change the voice to a high pitch. So immediately when you hear the high pitch, you know some antagonist is speaking. And when God comes to the garden, he speaks in a very low, slow voice. And we didn't tell them that. They did it by themselves. They just knew this is how stories are to be told, and that's how they translated Scripture. And we found all these features. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's been fascinating. And we discovered this basically the first 3 days of the workshop. It didn't take months to figure out, but so quickly we were able to find them. But just an amazing story. Just last week, they had another consultant visit. And the first 4 stories of Genesis 1 to 4 recorded, and it went out to the village. And one of the variants is Musende, and it's the eastern one, very remote part of Angola. The stories were played. The people, 17 people in one village, immediately accepted Christ. They said, this is what we want. And I said, what is it about it that you want? You know, there was no gospel. Jesus was not preached. It was just those 4 chapters from Genesis. But they said all these things that God created. We thought everything existed since forever. That God actually speaks. We didn't know that. You know, and they just all these gospel features. That God came. That he made a wife for Adam. That he actually, after they sinned, he still came back. You know, he wasn't vengeful. The ideas of the deities is they are revengeful. He came back. And then what happened with Cain and Abel and the envy and what God did for Cain and how he accommodated him, not having been punished. All those things said, but this is the God we want to serve. Tell us more. And the next followed was the gospel and instant effect. It's not going to happen everywhere, but it is amazing. It just shows us the power of oral work, oral translation, and also starting with Genesis so early. Anyway, a couple of emerging issues. I have 4 more minutes to cover all these. I will be as quick as I can. The first one is language style. We found that there are 3 types. I'm sure academically that there are people here who can, the different registers, there are actually 7 or 8 registers, depends how you define it. But basically the 3 that we found, you know, it's casual speech, colloquial speech, the way that most people just speak in the street. We found actually that most of our oral translation actually have this register. Then there's the more formal. You know, often pastors speak that. You know, it is being, you know, it's people who have, you know, who can lead funerals, you know, official speeches, government speeches. Those people who have been trained in that, they tend to be more formal in their language. That looks different again than to the normal casual speech. But then there are the special orality. I call them oralities. You know, there are different oralities in the culture. And these are the special oralities, the high quality, the oral traditions, the oral, we can say oral literature. It's a complete misnomer, but it's basically what it is, the oral literature. And there are people in a culture, and it's not easy to get them. They're not automatically involved. But if you can get them involved, it really enhances the quality of a translation. So language style, that's an issue that needs to be discussed at a translation brief. You know, what type of style is okay for you? What is the style you need for this oral translation? Is casual speech okay? Does it need to be more formal? Does it need to be oral literature? These are questions that need to be discussed. Second one is translation type. Where do you fit in on the type scale? doing a type 1, a very literal translation, corresponding translation, is very hard to do orally. That is, our experience is that. The second one, type 2, sort of the NIV type, a resembling translation, we have found that that works quite well if they do performance, or oral performance of already a written translation. That can be done. But most of the types possibly it will use is probably type 3, type 4, a more dynamic version of translation. Again, this is a topic that needs to be discussed at a translation brief process, because often they will ask a type 1 or a type 2, at least in Africa, and one needs to be sure. So here are the types again. Another one is scope. What scripture do you want? You know, everybody says, yeah, we want the whole Bible. That's just very quickly, yes, the whole Bible in oral form. That is a huge task. And if you want to commit to that, you need to really commit to that. Or does it automatically go over to some written form? There's also issues that are to be discussed at a translation brief session. And basically, there are three choices. Do you do selections, a lectionary, oral lectionary, story sets, a scripture selection sets? Do you use a portion approach? Do you actually do Bible books? Just a few, core scriptures maybe. What's that even? Very difficult to define. And then do you do a full testament? Full New, full Old Testament. Again, this is an issue to be discussed early on in the project. And then the oral written interface is always an important one. The whole issue, it's raised to the last one of authoritative scripture. There is still the mindset that something written is more authoritative. And so how is the interaction happening between the oral and the print? For example, one question is, what do you base it on? What are your source language? Is it really a translation that they value, that they trust? And a translation is trustworthy. If it's, that's an important decision. We cannot just bring in any translation that we think. It needs to really be a local decision, a translation, a version that they want to build it on. But then, along the way, there will be interaction between the oral and the written. It is inevitable. There is no pure oral culture, really. That doesn't really exist. Probably advantageous in terms of style to minimize the influence of the written. At certain stages, especially the early stages. But one has to really discuss this very carefully with the community. And then, of course, I will not need to talk about this more. I mentioned that. Yeah, there are three approaches in the oral written interface. One is that the oral translation is done, and then later on a written one is done. In some ways, is do an oral one and actually continue doing an oral one and do a written one simultaneously, to have it transcribed, for instance. Another approach is to completely avoid, or try to avoid print as much as possible. I think render falls in this category. And a third approach is like the Himba and the Sun. They are not restricted between the switching back and forth between written and oral and print as the drafting process gets underway. And then the last one, I don't think I have time to really go into this. It is related to the previous one. It is the whole thing of authoritative scripture. I just want to mention one thing. With oral Bible translation, something new is happening. I think the greatest innovation we bring is the door is open, that an oral translation will become an authoritative translation instead of a written translation. We don't have examples of that, not yet, but the door is now open. And it has huge consequences for what this means for us. And that's a discussion that needs to be had in a translation brief process. It is not just a quick meeting at the beginning. It's an ongoing conversation. It can take years. And it probably, as the translation also progresses, to have this conversation going on. It's just an example here of authoritative scripture in the Sun area. What they actually do, thank you for Essel for giving me that. How even within the same country, how different translations are being used as their source. And and what type of translation that one is. Sometimes they actually translate from a type 3 translation or from a type 4 translation, other times from a more literal translation. So complex issues to discuss with the local community. Good. Basically here as well that I want to say the whole quality control, I really promise I will end, my time is up, but that the role of the translation consultant, the whole checking role of the Bible agency side is only one side of the whole quality control. There needs to be some local process as well. And that is a very difficult one, especially if it's a new situation where the church is very young or basically non-existent. For that I will say is that the verdict on the trustworthiness of that translation is just postponed. It will just take time, maybe 10 years, maybe longer, it doesn't matter. But there is a process, there needs to be a process where the translations, the consultant's input, which is basically an external input, needs to be matched with an internal input, and that's a local conversation. So local people need to be trained, exposed to theological training. We need to get those people in. We need to maybe get other people in from the country, from the country itself, national leaders who maybe understand the culture. There's a range of people that can get involved in this conversation to eventually have authoritative oral translations. Anyway, I end here. This is it. Thank you.